A Stitch Witch's Guide to Sewing Tools. Hello fellow Stitch Witches! I am starting a series of videos that go into the tools and techniques of a Stitch Witch. What is a Stitch Witch, you might ask? Well, a Stitch Witch is any sewist or crafter who likes to make things a little more inspired by the more macabre or witchy or gothic aesthetics. As someone who highly values aesthetics and utility, I want sewing tools that satiate my hunger for an aesthetically pleasing creative space. Generally, the idea is if I surround myself with things that are more macabre and gothic, that they will help me generate ideas for creating things within that same vein. And with that, I would actually like to quickly mention some of my ideas for the videos in the series, starting off with today's video, which will be about covering an ironing board and making a tailor's ham and seam roll or sausage roll that are all made with spooky fabrics. I think it would be fun to also make a video going over Stitch Witch sewing and like fabric choices and how that comes into play, and maybe some stitching techniques, as well as I would think it'd be fun to make a pin cushion and a matching wrist pin cushion. I haven't seen any really cool cone thread, like these cone thread adapters for your sewing machine, so I think it'd be fun to create one of those as well. And there's other sewing things that, you know, we all use and need in our sewing space. So I think that the world is lacking a more gothic, witchy, macabre design when it comes to sewing spaces. Most sewing spaces I see do not at all follow that aesthetic, which is fine. I also appreciate pastel and just normal, cute, you know, aesthetics. I just, you know, spooky stuff makes my heart happy, so why not make a sewing space that makes my heart happy and makes it easier for me to create the things that I like the best. Anyway, without much further ado, today's video. Here are the projects. Recovering an ironing board. Materials: ironing board, 100% quilting cotton, mylar/poly batting, single fold bias tape. Here is my old Target, like dorm room sized ironing board. It's a little tiny guy, about maybe 2 feet-ish long. Pretty handy, but I will say that the foam has definitely left something to be desired when it comes to ironing with the little grate underneath. If you have an older ironing board, you probably know what I'm talking about. Sometimes those grates get pressed into your fabric. Here I'm just using the previous ironing board cover to measure out 3-ish inches out of the Mylar poly batting. This is meant for like oven mitts and lunch boxes and things like that. It's got like that thermal metal Mylar put in there just to kind of retain heat. I thought this might be good for an ironing board. I will say that it's not waterproof, so do expect some steam underneath the ironing board when you're steaming. Here is my cotton fabric. This is the cute, spooky pumpkin vine. I'm not quite sure what the name is, but I love it, and I got a bunch to do a whole sewing room's worth of tools with. And I'm also tracing out a pattern for that as well, using the actual shape of the ironing board. Next, I'm just trimming down the edges so that they match before I baste the Mylar poly batting and the cotton together. Just a simple basting stitch. Now I'm just pinning on some vintage rights bias tape that I had in my stash. I thought that I could get rid of some of the stash and not have to buy too many new things for this project. Then after we sew the bias tape to the right side of the fabric, we are going to trim all the excess of that bulky mylar batting, and then we're going to flip the bias tape to the opposite side and pin that down and sew that, creating a channel for elastic or the cord from the original ironing board cover. So I actually had a bit of a struggle. Because of the bulk of this, I really struggled stitching the bias tape down. I would suggest taking much more time and care with doing that than I did, because I ended up having to rip some of the stitches to be able to get my bodkin with the thread through. So just a word of caution, make sure you do a bit of a more careful job stitching down. And here we are. Ironing board is recovered. Tailor's ham and seam roll. Materials: 100% wool garbardine, 100% quilting cotton, and a petting bed pine shavings. You can get this at any pet store. First, I wanted to steam all the wool garbardine because I didn't pre-wash it, because I'm not planning on washing my ham or my sausage roll, but it is recommended that you steam it at least, since you'll be steaming and ironing on top of them. Here's my patterns. These come from a Merchant & Mills pattern book that I actually got my boyfriend, but I've been using. I highly suggest their Merchant & Mills book. I will put a link down below, but you can actually get free patterns for this online. However, also keep in mind that the Merchant & Mills book does everything in centimeters, and if you live in the US like I do, you will be severely confused. So I just need to cut out my cotton out of the pattern, and then also the wool. And then just pin the two sides together, leaving a gap so that I can flip them inside out and stuff them full of wood shavings. It's about here when I realized that I did not pin right sides together. I pinned wrong sides together for some reason. I'm not sure why. My brain wanted to do a French seam when a French seam was not what we were doing. So I took a much needed lunch break and then decided to return to this task at a later time after some seam ripping and some snacks. Now I'm just trimming down the raw edges after zigzagging next to the straight stitch I did along all of the sides, and flipping them inside out and preparing for filling with wood shavings. So I tried a couple techniques here. I tried using a funnel. That didn't really work. I used a couple different things to try to shove the wood shavings through the funnel, which were very unsuccessful. So I ended up trying to make a paper funnel because I thought maybe that would be easier, but it was not. So I ended up just kind of using my hands and just shoving the wood shavings in by hand, which I will say my skin was not a big fan of. But it worked. It made a humongous mess. Be prepared to vacuum if you decide to do this project, or do it outside if you're wise. I would suggest doing this outside if you can. But I live in an upstairs apartment where there isn't really much of an outside for me to do this in. I did a quick little ladder stitch to close them up. I don't know why I chose pine. I'm actually allergic, but and I also don't like the smell, so I just thought that maybe I should have done that instead of aspen. Maybe I should have done aspen bedding. Let me know below if you have a preference. I also could have done fabric scraps for filling the tailor's ham and seam roll, but those compress over time, whereas the wood shavings do not compress the same way, so yeah. I now also have a huge bag of pine shavings that I don't know what to do with because I don't have the kind of pets that use those. Let me know if you have any suggestions down below for a bunch of pine shavings. And you have a nice, heavy, but sturdy tailor's ham and seam roll. So I want to do this project because I never actually used a seam roll or a tailor's ham, and I've been noticing in my sewing that I could really benefit from these kinds of ironing tools, especially when doing bust seams like princess seams. Any seam that's curved that you really need to be doing on a rounded object. It's, I mean, I've been trying to do better at sewing and trying to be a bit more professional with my sewing, and making tools like these will help me a lot. And I'm excited to get some use out of them. I've actually gotten already some use out of them, so I'm really happy with that. And I highly suggest making some of your own in a cool, spooky fabric if you find one that you like, or any fabric that makes you happy, really. I think it's important to customize your tools to your taste, and I think that aesthetics and utilitarianism can definitely meet in a harmonious union. And that's kind of the, that's one of my mission statements for this channel, is I want to show that you can have things that fit your tastes while also still being functional, and I think beauty and function are very important. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in whatever video comes next. It may be the part 2 to this video, or it may be one of the many videos I've been working on for the last couple of months. Keep it creepy. I'll see you next time. Bye.